Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Katie Stoddart. I'm a productivity and performance coach, also known as the Focus Bee. And today I'm here with another wonderful coach, Nicky Peachment, and we're going to discuss surprising facts and how to manage stress. Nicky, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit what stress actually is?
Yeah, of course. So it's great to be here with you, Katie. We normally have more of a coaching relationship, so this is a bit different. I'm a career coach and I also work with people who have their own businesses and need a bit of a confidence or a clarity to move forward with their businesses. But on both of those sides, what often comes up is something around stress. And I'm a bit of a stress geek, as Katie has learnt. I love learning about stress, what it does for you. It'll become quite apparent why it's so personally of interest to me, but that's what I do. So I know Katie's going to be admitting a few more people as I'm talking. So do you want me to just kick off with a bit of background about stress, Katie? Would that be helpful?
Yes, it'd be lovely to hear what do you think we actually mean when we talk about stress, because it's such a generic word. It'd be great to see your point of view as to what stress actually means.
Yeah, of course. So I do have a background in psychology. I did an honours degree in psychology a long while ago, but a hangover from that is that I'm also still a member of the British Psychological Society. So I've got lots of journals and books floating around. So I'll give you the psychologist's description of stress. So what stress is, it's how we respond to stressors. And stressors are life events or other things that happen that cause us to feel distressed or for us to have that stress response. And it does go back millennials, from when humans first began. It was quite a helpful thing, because if something angry with big teeth was coming at you, to have a stress response could actually save your life. So that's, as human beings, it had a very good reason. But in daily life, what we find is that we're responding to the stresses around us, and it's not always helpful. And what happens is our baseline of stress builds and builds and builds, and then things can go wrong and people can feel burnt out or overly anxious. So to have some strategies to bring that back down is really helpful. See, I get all kind of animated when I talk about it. And how we respond in different ways. So some of those responses are very physical. So we might feel we get butterflies in our stomach, and part of that is us preparing to run away from that scary beast. Some of it is emotional. Some people get angry, frustrated, feel trapped. And all of these things happen. So it's all these emotional, psychological, physiological responses to these stressors. So when we talk about feeling stressed, it's actually quite a complex thing, which is why it's great for me, because I can learn about it, forever. I've been going for 2 decades on it. So
Wow, it's amazing. You sound really passionate about it. I love all the different aspects you mentioned right now, from the fact that we're sort of wired towards stress, but it's no longer as useful as it originally was. And also the way you said that it both is an emotional response, but also a physical response. And so we have to sort of manage all of these aspects, both the physical, maybe nerves, and then the thoughts we have and the emotions we have. And from what we were talking about last time, are there people that are more prone to being stressed than others?
yeah, so this is part of when I was learning about stress. I learned about it years ago and I really wasn't comfortable with it. So I thought, okay, that's one psychological theory I'll just learn about and put to one side. But it came about more recently, and I was in a better position for me to really go with it and be open to it. And some people might already be familiar with it, but for other people it will be a bit of a surprise, that there is a type A and a type B that came out of psychological research. And there are 2 types of people, and this is why I resisted it, because I didn't want to be told I was one half of a massive population. But it's kind of how you approach these things. So there's a type A and a type B. And people who are type A are, I am type A, so by all means use me as your, your kind of guinea pig for this. We speak very quickly, we are tending to multitask, we will be rushing into the meeting at last minute because we've just done 101 other things. We eat quickly, we get anxious quickly, all of these things. And as a type A, I believed for a long time it's actually very helpful. It makes me more productive, more focused. I get stuff done. And that's all great. However, it also means that my levels, the things that are going on in my body, are at a higher level. The type A's and the type B's, and I do have type B's around me, which is really, really helpful. They will be calmer, slower pace, steady. If you're waiting for an appointment at the doctor's, the type A's like me may well be trying to get our phones out, doing stuff, fidgeting, and the type B will be sat there calmly thinking, oh, it's only 5 minutes after my time, that's fine, I'm here now. So there are different responses. The way to approach it, particularly if you're like me and you don't like being pigeonholed, is to use that as a tool. So you're learning about yourself or your predisposition, and then from there you can choose how to respond. So this morning, for example, as Katie knows, as well as being a coach, I'm currently doing a 9-to-5 job as well on a temporary basis. And I've got the day off today. So this morning, when I was preparing for the webinar, there was a point at which I had a choice. I could either spend another 15 minutes reaching out to contacts, doing additional posts, tweaking the PDF that's going out after this, all this sort of stuff, or I could get a cup of tea and sit in the garden with my husband and our dog. As a type A, I'm predisposed to keep going, but because I've learned that I've got some unhealthy habits, what I did was actually go down, have that cup of tea, sit, listen to the birds, enjoy the sunshine that we've got, calm myself down, and then come in. So what you're seeing now is the excited, passionate Nicky, not the, oh, stressful, that side of me. So wonderful. That's the difference between type A and B. And I have made sure that the PDF that we've put together, I have got a description of type A and B so people can have a read through afterwards and work out which side of the fence they may be on and how best to approach it in future.
I really love this description. This is something I had actually never come across, this type A and type B regarding stress. And everything you said just made me realize I'm basically a type A who spent the last 2 years learning to become type B. So everything you said from, doing things last minute, I don't do that anymore, or I try not to. Multitasking, which we're going to talk about shortly, I also have stopped doing. Looking at my phone just before an appointment, I also don't do. But these are all sort of new learned habits, because I realized that leaving at the very last minutes, or doing a lot of things at the same time, or talking really quickly, because I used to speak even faster, were all things that actually made me feel stressed. And one of the things that really has helped me is both raising my own awareness as to how I manage these things, realizing, why am I doing this? Why am I leaving everything to the last minute, or leaving in a rush, or doing everything at once? Because it gave me the illusion I was being busy and productive, but actually it was more counterproductive. So that has helped. And obviously meditation has been huge, because the more I meditated, the calmer I became, the calmer my pace of talking, but still you can be very efficient. I think there's a misconception that if you speak slowly, you actually think slowly, and therefore you're not as smart. And that's like not true. I do not believe that my brain abilities have been reduced because I speak more slowly. So I feel that has helped me a lot. I don't know, Nicky, if you've also managed to sort of slow down your pace, and how you felt that has impacted your focus and your productivity.
Yeah, I definitely, like you, I discovered mindful meditation actually in a previous role. They brought it in for another group of employees and offered it out to the rest of us. And I didn't know if it would do much, but actually, and again, there's research that by doing meditation, it doesn't work for everybody. There are certain people who it doesn't work for. But it does work for a lot of people. And actually, when you're meditating, you are changing the connections and the way that your brain works as well. So they have actually done some research around that, which I can share with you afterwards, and anybody else if that's of interest, that this stuff does work. And that's a really interesting example of how our brains and our bodies are very much connected. And as part of this type A, type B research, they also found that people with a type A predisposition over time were actually more likely to experience cardiac issues as well, because of the stress levels being raised and what happens to the body at that point. So it is worth looking at. I would also say that there are, I think it's quite obvious when I'm in a type A and I'm in very much in my type A disposition, but also there are situations where people who are type A will appear very calm. So I know when I'm at work, I can appear really, really calm, even though I am a type A. And that's because I'm internalizing a lot of it, which is also, it's not healthy to bottle things up, they need to come out. But that's been a learned behaviour. So for me, that was because of my first professional role. I was in some quite stressful situations, but I had to appear very capable, confident, in control for my clients, so that I was giving them that confidence and calmness, and therefore I was hiding a lot of the things that were actually going on inside. So if you're sat there thinking, well, I'm always chilled, people tell me I'm calm, that may be the case, but it is worth just noticing. And I think if anybody's there thinking, which am I, I'm struggling, start by looking around you and actually trying to identify some traits in people that you know, and that can help you to just open up that reflection to work it out.
Yes.
But you picked up a really important point earlier. We were talking about productivity, because when you're, particularly for us type A's, I mentioned multitasking, and there's also been some research around that task switching. So we can't do multitasking, is a bit of a myth, as I'm sure you're going to tell us, because we can only do one thing at a time. But what happens with a lot of type A's is this task switching. So I think what I've found really interesting listening to you, Katie, is how you talk about the impact of that side of stress on productivity. So I'm open to learning much more about that as a type A.
Yes, I think multitasking is something that people don't always think about, or they don't even realize they're doing it, which is the biggest danger. Because, for example, they might just be doing one task, but their phone might be next to them, and they'll suddenly sort of pick it up on a regular basis and interrupt the task they're doing. Or they might actively be switching from one tab to the next. And what happens is it gives us the illusion, because we get a small sort of dopamine kick every time we switch and we start a new task. So it gives us the impression that we're being more productive and busy, and it's an illusion. Actually, obviously, it's counterproductive, and this is because of the attentional residual. So what happens is that every time you start a task, part of your brain is involved in this task, and so when you switch to a different one, your brain hasn't finished processing the first task, and then you start another one, and then another one, and so then you have all these little sort of folders opened in your mind that aren't finished, and that makes it really hard for you to dedicate your entire focus and energy to the next task you're doing. And people nowadays, especially with smartphones and technology, are doing it more and more, which means they're losing their ability to focus for a long time, and it's making it harder for them to be productive, to achieve what they set out to do, and they're getting hooked also to this sort of energizing but terrible habit of switching from one thing to the next. I remember I was sitting on a train a few months back when, you know, trains was still a thing, and there was a guy in front of me in the front row, and he had his computer open, and I've never seen someone switch that quickly. And he was going from writing an email and stopping and opening his phone. He had two phones, then he opened another phone, then he was going back, they were switching tabs, and just sort of looking at him made me feel overwhelmed. I thought, I don't know how he can actually do anything efficiently that way. And plus, and this is something else that Nicky and I were discussing the other day, actually multitasking induces stress. So in some way, it gives you a bit of dopamine, a bit of an impression that you're being efficient, that you're getting things done. But on the other hand, it also lets off cortisol. So it lets off the stress hormone of, I still need to do this, I still need to do that. And, oh, I didn't finish the first thing, and you go back. And so your whole body, instead of just running on, I don't know, energy, joy, doing whatever it is you're doing, flow, being in the flow with one activity, instead of running on that, it's running on pure sort of small bits of dopamine and cortisol the whole time, which obviously, especially talking long term, as Nicky was saying, in terms of illnesses or cardiac diseases and this sort of thing, long term, it works a bit, like you'll still get things done, but it wears your body out. And this is a lot of the time can lead to burnout, but it can also lead to just sort of unfulfillment and this sort of sense of never really achieving everything you want to achieve. And this was because also another very important point in terms of multitasking is that it makes us lose clarity. So because we've got all these little folders open, we forget what's the main outcome I'm doing right now. Why did I actually open my computer half an hour ago? Was it really to just answer all these posts, or wasn't I supposed to do this report? And so this sort of lack of clarity is also quite detrimental to our well-being.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And there are tools that we can use now. I think the irony is that some of the technology that's not helpful, because certainly when I started work, you couldn't have that many tabs open because your computer would break. Whereas now, technology's got so much better that you can have so much open and you can flip between them. And it's being mindful of what you're doing and noticing that. So I'm much more aware, and actually I've got my husband primed for this as well, that he spots it and he tells me if I'm doing, if I've got my phone in one hand, my iPad, and we're trying to watch TV. If I've gone down that route, he will say, what are you doing? And just have that check. So whenever, as coach Katie knows, great coaching question is when you're trying to achieve something is who can help you. So if you do have somebody around who can help you, and just spot that you have got several screens or you've got both phones in your hands for no good reason, just to kind of interrupt that, because it is that kind of addiction to the dopamine hits, and it is the cortisol that you're used to, and getting into that spiral. And I've certainly had experience of it. And I spoke to somebody who, it's really interesting, in the UK there was a big explosion quite a few years ago now, about 10, 12 years ago. And it took out a lot of businesses around it. So immediately these businesses had no premises. And I've got a family member who dealt with it at the time, and I've actually met somebody else with a different business. But you can really get addicted to being in that stressful environment. And one that I spoke to had actually been working on it for 2 years of high stress. So to come out, to manage that during that time healthily, and then to transition is actually quite tricky. But now we can use technology to help us. So I've got an app on my phone. I don't remember putting it on there, but it's obviously, I think it's actually come with the phone. It tells me how many pickups I do. So how many times I've actually picked up my phone to look at it. And that's quite helpful. It tells me about my screen time, all this sort of stuff. So have you got any other tips, Katie? Because I feel like my phone is doing it all for me and I haven't asked it to do this stuff. But have you got any tips for people like me who find themselves looking at 2 phones at the same time or having lots of tabs open?
Yes, you've shared already quite a few very valuable points in terms of who can support you. That's one thing, because sometimes other people will notice patterns that you're not aware of yourself, whether it's your partner, whether it's a coach, whether it's a friend. That definitely helps. In terms of apps you can use, for sure, there are a lot of different apps out there, whether it's things like Cold Turkey or Rescue Time, also the block websites that you tend to drift towards, that can help, or Forest and Freedom, and there's quite a few different ones. Focus Mate, which is also an interesting one, where you work on a task and you schedule a time with someone else that you don't know, and you both sort of work at the same time, and there's both an accountability and a reflection time afterwards. And the idea is always to sort of keep you mono-tasked, mono-focused on one activity. And I think the other interesting part that you mentioned, Nikki, was about being mindful. So we've already talked about mindful meditation, which is one thing that, calms us down. But there's also mindful working, or mindful pretty much anything, which just really consists in observing how are we working. So taking a moment and think, what am I doing right now? Why am I doing these 4 things at once? What was my outcome? And just having these brief moments of zooming out somehow and gaining perspective and thinking, why am I doing this? And sometimes in those moments when you feel you're getting a bit lost or doing too much or getting stressed, just taking time out, right? Leaving the computer, going outside, getting a glass of water, breathe 5-10 minutes, write things down. When you come back, it's incredible. 5-10 minutes tops, your mind's clear. Right, no, I know what I was supposed to be doing. Report and close all the tabs and start fresh. So this is one of the things that I found the most helpful for me if ever I find myself going down that rabbit hole. Being like, why did I just spend 20 minutes sort of going all over? Stop, time out, and start again. And I use something called tomato timer on the computer, which it uses a Pomodoro technique, which means that every half an hour the alarm goes off. And I found that really useful for two reasons. First of all, when I set the timer, I decide on one specific outcome I want to do during that time. So I have half an hour. In this half an hour, you know, like for example, Nikki did draw the PDF to summarize a few key tips for the webinar in this half an hour block. So it helps you to decide on a certain outcome and activity you want to manage in that time. That's one thing I really like. And the second thing I really like is that when the timer goes off, you get to think, did I achieve my outcome? Was I working on this, or had I switched tasks? And you get to think, okay, I'm having a short break. So the timer goes off and it's, you get up from your seat, have a short break. If you need a bit longer, take a bit longer, or otherwise just stop, breathe, refocus, and then you set the time on again. And my most productive days are always the ones where I use it. So every time I'm not as productive, I think, why didn't I use the timer? Why didn't I use the timer? So this is one of the ones that helps me most. I don't know, Nikki, if you use Pomodoro, if you have any other things that help you to sort of stay focused and diminish stress in that way.
Yeah, I absolutely use the Pomodoro technique. I don't have an app. I literally just use my phone and set it for 30 minutes or 25 minutes. I also, I started doing it to try it out, but I do, and I suggest to anybody, if we're saying anything you're not sure, give it a go. If it works for you, fantastic. So something I tried out for my job was I break my day into half-hour chunks. Meetings go in, and then I fill in the half-hour blocks around them. And some of the activities I want to do, I know are going to take an hour, so I'll block out 2 sections. And then as I'm going through the day, I'm crossing off the time, and then I'm crossing off what I've done. And that really helps me to keep focused and know that I don't need to worry about that other thing because it doesn't happen until 3 o'clock this afternoon or 4 o'clock this afternoon. But right now it's 12:22, I'm in this block and this is what I'm doing. And it, as you say, it helps because you're completing something so that you're not leaving those folders open in your brain, which I loved because when I'm trying to explain my mindful meditation, which sometimes I only do for 5 minutes or even 1 minute, I describe it as rebooting the computer. So absolutely, it's shutting those folders down. As Katie knows, the orange room is our study. I'm very lucky that we've got this little room that I can come in and work. But I do get up and go away from the room as part of my break so that I can just shut the door and go somewhere else. And I do use that quite a lot. Because as you say, you get sucked into something and then you end up going down a rabbit hole and you're no longer being productive, and what you're doing is probably feeding your dopamine hit with something instead. So yeah, absolutely use that Pomodoro technique.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about leaving the room. Like when you described earlier having the cup of tea outside, these are the most energizing breaks. And I think it's very interesting that when we're discussing stress and how to manage it, we end up discussing sort of scheduling in the end. Because I find also the time slots and planning and scheduling your day and having these sort of productive habits and the self-awareness about how you work really reduces stress, because you're no longer wondering what you're going to be working on, because decision making is a huge stress factor, which is also something else that we can discuss. But not knowing what you're going to do and having multiple options open and then switching between all the options causes huge amounts of cortisol and stress. But if your day is clear and it's scheduled and you're on time and you allow a bit of, leeway between your activities, not all one after the other. This actually used to be the thing I was the most guilty of, actually. My husband always used to say sort of like, you always do this, one appointment after the next, no breaks. I never do this anymore, never. And it's something that you learn. I mean, we all have maybe type A habits if we're type A inclined. And so we're used to doing things in a certain way, but we can also learn, which is great. And so actually, I'm running the risk when I'm doing this to be late to the next one, or to be stressed at the end, or to not even have time to get up and have a glass of water. Why am I doing this? If someone suggests something at 5 and I have an appointment at 4, either I say no, or I'll just, do it later on, but not sort of having one after the next. So I feel that time slotting and planning your day and have it clearly scheduled really diminishes stress.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said about learning this, because our brains are elastic. We can change how we respond, and how we respond to stressors, and we do learn over time. So a great example is public speaking. 20 years ago, absolutely terrified me. I would get so stressed. I actually remember doing a really short presentation, not that many people, and when I sat down, I was shaking, and that was the adrenaline leaving my body, because I'd got myself into such a state. I did it, got the presentation done, but I was in a state. And now I can do that and not be in that state. I might have an adrenaline rush because I got so excited about doing it, but I'm responding to that stressor in the same way, and actually being really calm and enjoying the presentation that I'm doing. So we can learn how to deal with the stresses that are coming at us. But it's also about being kind to yourself, because if you're trying to change, it's almost like, don't get stressed about not getting it perfect first time. So if you are trying not to rush into appointments and leaving gaps, and then you've somehow not managed that and you're rushing from one thing to the next, don't beat yourself up. Don't let that be a cause of the stress. What you're doing is you're learning and developing, and sometimes we get it wrong while we're learning, and that's part of the process. So just in case anybody's trying anything that we're suggesting, I don't want that trying it out to become another form of stress. So be kind of kind to yourselves. If you're already feeling quite a high baseline of stress, the last thing you need is to add a layer of stress by trying to fix it. It's a bit of a vicious circle. So yeah, just be kind as you're trying out these different techniques, because if it's new to you, it will take time for you to adapt. But it does come in time.
Absolutely. And anything that can be learned, there's always a transition phase, and putting in place these habits and working on them constantly really has an impact later on your focus, on your productivity, on being calmer, like Nikki said, in terms of public speaking. And this is what I really love in personal development in general, is that we can look at areas in our lives where we feel that they're not the way we would like them to be somehow. I mean, Nikki, I don't know, but probably after you did that speech and you were sort of trembling afterwards when you sat down, you probably thought, well, every time I do a presentation, I don't want to feel this way. And it can be the same with people that are shy when speaking to strangers, for example, or it can be the same if, it's working on a piece of work and you find yourself distracted all the time and managing these distractions. And you can just look at the different areas of your life and think, how do I change this? And then put in place new habits, because at the end of the day, that's really what works the most. I imagine that if you do, 10 speeches, a month, and every time you work on meditating beforehand and focusing on the audience and knowing your message, you'll be relaxed more and more. And so by putting in place these habits and being calmer every time and noticing and having this self-awareness, self-observation, maybe journaling, maybe writing it down, we can really sort of start to incorporate it in our new routine, in our daily life. And that has an impact in all the different areas of our life. So stress, and maybe in this case also we're talking about it's linked to productivity and it's linked to sort of other areas, is one of the things that we can influence and that we can change. And it's also, and I feel we haven't discussed this as much right now, but it's also an emotion. And so managing our emotions is also a really interesting point. Maybe Nikki, you'd like to share a few words on how in general we can manage our emotions, stress being one of them.
Yeah, so one thing, and I noticed this in myself, because I think that the first thing is to notice when when these things are happening. And for me, there's a certain email sender that when it pops into my email box, I can feel myself starting to react. And that's a learned behaviour, because this particular sender, there is a pattern that they will send an email that will cause issues for a particular project that I'm working on. And because I'm doing 9 to 5, it tends to happen kind of outside of office hours, so I might be a bit more tired. So the email pops in, and my learned response is, oh, here we go again. And I can feel myself thinking. So the first thing for me is just, I noticed that when this email came in, this was my response. And logically, I can understand why. I can understand that emotion of, oh, is coming from a certain place, but it's not helpful because it's putting my mind into a certain frame when I'm responding. That's not me responding in the best way. So in order for me to respond in the best potential way for this particular email, I kind of have to notice that I'm responding, label it as, this is my, there's some prejudging going on here that this is going to be a nightmare, and it might not be. So let's just label it and actually be open-minded. So that's the first thing I do, is notice that I'm responding. Basically being kind to myself and going, look, it's understandable that you feel this way. However, this is something in you that's being triggered. So I'm depersonalizing it. And then take a deep breath. I have been known to walk out of the orange room and come back in and actually take a full break. But now I'm practicing the habit. So now I just kind of close my eyes, deep breath in and out, open the email, read it, and it's kind of depersonalized. So not attaching lots of things to it. It's just, okay, here's the email, and then I'll respond to the email as I see it, rather than having a purely emotional response to it. So that's just an example of one of my triggers that I've noticed in the last month or so. So it really is about noticing it, labeling it, depersonalizing it. You might need to take yourself away, even if it's just a deep breath in and out, and then come back to it and respond calmly. So that's what I do. And we've included in the PDF that we'll be sharing one of my favourite exercises, which is mood hoovers and energy vampires, which seems a bit odd, but that's so that it's to encourage people to just list down all the things that are causing responses in you. And it's really helpful because it's things like that start to drain you, or cause emotional states to change. And if they're unhealthy, then writing them all down is helpful in itself. And then you've got a list that you can start working through and figure out how to change it. And it could be that email sender, it could be the heap of ironing in your spare room that you walk into and they just want to shut the door again. Noticing these things is the first thing. So there's something really tight. If you live with somebody, there will be something they do that winds you up. If you haven't found it yet, you're not looking hard enough. So find out what that is. There's something that my other half does that really does not matter. The world will not end at all because of it. It's now a joke in our relationship that he does this thing and it winds me up. I don't even know that there's a good reason for it. It's so trivial. And we now have it as a joke. So once you notice these things that are just bugging you, I think is one of the phrases that's been used, you can then address it. And in this case, nothing has changed other than my response to that stressor. So rather than seeing it and going, he's done it again, why does this happen? And seeing myself get set off, I now look at it and chuckle, because I'm sure half the time he does it on purpose now because he knows it's a trigger. So sometimes when you write these lists down, just be aware that sometimes there will be things that aren't that trivial, but they still be things that you cannot change. So it's understanding something called your locus of control, and there will be things outside of your control. So sometimes you can't, it's not as easy as saying, well, I'll get the ironing done and it's done. It will be something you can't change, but what you can change is your response to that stressor. So you might not be able to giggle at it like I am with my most recent trivial one, but you might find a healthy way of managing it. And you might need some help in doing that, because if you can't figure it out for yourself, then maybe a friend, a coach, or another professional can help you to navigate that as well.
Absolutely. You've shared some really interesting points. I'll do a brief recap to see if everyone was sort of following. One of the things you mentioned is having a list of the different stresses, the different triggers that you have that create certain responses. So having them all written down is sort of the first step, because it helps you to notice them. Then the actual way of dealing with these sort of stresses and factors is by noticing them, labeling them. You also talked about acceptance. So I often think of it as notice what my response is, name it, accept it, which is also when you said being kind to yourself. It's another way of saying the same thing. And then managing it. And something interesting that you said also, when you answer that email, I believe that being proactive when you can control it is very important, because then procrastination, interestingly enough, is another factor of stress. And by acting immediately or after a brief break, you're not having it hanging above your head the whole time. Oh, that email, I still need to answer. Oh, and it just comes back to you over and over again. So you manage your response, take a bit of time out, breathe, go outside, and then you answer, but you answer calmly. So that was really important. So the different factors, managing your response when it happens, being proactive. And the last point you mentioned that I find it so important, especially with the current situation, is also a very sort of stoic approach, which is knowing the difference between things you can control and things you can't control. And essentially, any stress you have from things that are totally outside of your control is a total waste of your energy. Because if it's something you can't do anything about, then stress isn't going to help you. And stress, biologically speaking, is so if a tiger comes in front of you, you can run. But if it's just pouring down and you don't like it when it's rainy, feeling upset about it, upset is another emotion, or feeling stressed maybe because you have an event to go to and you're going to be soaked and you're not going to look the part and you don't have a change of clothes, or I don't know. This sort of response is not helpful. So the best thing to do in situations that you can control is to be proactive, just like Nikki illustrated with the email. And in situations you can't control, it's acceptance. Now, acceptance is a very easy word to say. It's a lot more difficult to actually do. And the more you practice acceptance, the more you'll see that there's a big difference between being resigned to the situation. Well, it's raining, nothing I can do about it, and sort of shrugging your shoulders and being really annoyed and walking into your meeting being soaked, with being accepting. So just thinking, okay, right now this is out of my control. Looking for bits that you can control. Is there any way you can be less wet? Is there any way you can have a change of clothes? Are there anything you can sort of modulate in your response to the event and the situation? And if there's really nothing you can do, just seeing it as an opportunity to learn something. Check the weather before you go out, take an umbrella. I don't know, maybe my example is silly, but I'm just trying to say in general that when it's out of your control, really being fully accepting, trying to learn from that experience if it's possible, really has an impact on your mindset and your perspective. And it makes life a lot easier, because the more we stress about things that are totally out of our control, the more pressure we put on ourselves, the more upset and annoyed and frustrated, and all these emotions come towards us, and they really don't need to be there at all.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing there, it reminds me of the response that I'm sure most people have heard of, the fight or flight response. And there's also a freeze response. And it kind of is like, if you're not accepting it, you're fighting against it, rather than just accepting and letting it go. So it did remind me, we were talking about that as having a bit of a fight response.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were talking about looking at what you could do, so we're both runners. I personally do not like the rain. I don't like it when it's windy. I'm very particular about when I will run, and I run very slowly, so I'm out for ages. That's probably why I like good weather. But there is something about when you're going into something, or you're facing something where you don't have much control, where you feel you have to do it, or you can't change it. It is worth checking your language with yourself, because we talk about we should be doing something, and should is a very loaded word. So if anyone's listening, if you're saying you should be doing something, just check in with yourself what you mean by that. So it's good to think about your language and notice that, but also to look at what you can do. So the other reason there's an activity in the PDF that's around building up your positive muscles is to do with this. So if you see it's raining, and you then start to stress about, well, I'm going to that big meeting, it was already going to be difficult, and now it's raining, and you can also tell I've got curly hair, this does not look good when it's been rained on, or damp, it goes frizzy, it does not look attractive. But do the positive, use your positive muscles. So what can I do? What is going to help me? I have a hat in my handbag, so I can put something on this to kind of mitigate the frizz, or I just go with it and say, look, this is what you're getting. So we've put some positive exercises in there, and some of it's not really for a particular stressor, but it's more to build up that positive muscle, so that when it is raining, you're more inclined to think about what you can do rather than see it as an additional source of stress. So we put them in, and there's things like having imagery. I'm very visual, so I have imagery around me that helps me to feel either happy or confident or whatever it is I'm looking for. So I'll give you an example because it's in the study. Some of you may know this little fella. This is my dog. When I was talking about being in the garden, that's who I was with. I have a calendar on my desk, and each picture is a picture of him doing something stupid like that, because he's funny. So it brings me joy. It also reminds me that I do have a life outside of the orange room, so it reminds me to take those breaks. So one of the activities in there is about putting together some images that will help you to build these positive muscles. So for me, I was looking for images that make me happy, make me smile, remind me that there's a life outside work. And that's the image I have. There's another image that I use elsewhere in the house for different reasons that is all about achievement and confidence and focus and all those sorts of things. So we've included that activity and a few others as well that are designed to help build those positivity muscles, so that when we are faced with another stressor, we might have had a day full of stressors and then you get another one. It's just helping you to build up that positivity, so that you look at, okay, I can deal with this, and what can I do? And that's a big part of building resilience, is how you manage those triggers. And self-efficacy is a big thing. I know we've talked about it before, about self-efficacy and actually having the confidence in your ability to manage that stressor without it causing you, elevated blood pressure and elevated emotional responses that aren't helpful. So we've added that into the PDF as well.
Yes, all really, really relevant points right now. The fact that we're able or not, and we're confident or not as to how we manage our response to stress, sort of self-efficacy, as Nicky was saying, it's what makes all the difference, really. Because if we're under a stressful situation or stresses or triggers, but we're confident that we can manage this no matter what, and even if it's something totally out of our control, we can at least manage our emotions, we can at least manage our state, we can at least calm down, then we're not going to put ourselves under that much stress. It's not going to affect us as much. And what Nicky was sharing in terms of positivity, I feel that sometimes there's a misconception that being positive is ignoring all the sort of negative things that happen and just, putting on a brave smile and being happy all the time. And that's not at all what positivity is, or positive psychology. It's still looking bluntly at facts and situations that might not suit us. With, the silly example with the rain, it still doesn't suit us, but finding a way, being creative, being open-minded, maybe making a joke out of it in terms of, the frizzy hair. And this is just one example. This works for everything. So, if your flight is delayed and you're going to miss a really important scheduled event, then looking at how you can be creative, how you can use the time you're waiting for flight. What are you going to do during that time? Can you maybe use this later on to write an article about how to manage, delayed flights? Or can you use the opportunity to do something else when you land in that city and you've missed that event? All these sort of options and creativity only comes from accepting the situation you're in and not resigning yourself to it. Again, big difference. And opening your mind up and thinking, okay, now this is the new situation. What can I do about it? And I feel, especially with the current situation, the people who've benefited most have done exactly this. Say, look, this is a new situation. Now, how can I use this to benefit myself? How can I use this as an opportunity? What can I learn? How can I use this time for personal reflection? And all of this comes from positive psychology, from opening ourselves up, again, open, letting go of the sort of negative feelings that may occur, and focusing on the upsides, because in pretty much any situation, there's always something that can be done or something that can be managed that will help us through it.
Yeah, and I've worked in roles where I feel I've been very fortunate in my career and my life choices, but I've worked with people who have been in very stressful jobs, have been in very high stress environments. When you meet people who've been, I've kind of on both sides of the fence, so I've spent a lot of time with people who are in the forces, in the military and in the police force. I've also, because of my very first job, spent a lot of time with people who were up in court because they've been doing bad things and they were guilty, and seeing on kind of both sides. And I think positive, there's always some good that's in those situations that you can find when they're dealing with what they're dealing with. But I think you made a really important point that positive psychology, I think it can be seen as something that's quite fluffy and nice, and ignores all the horrible stuff, but actually it's a way of building up your resilience, because there are things out there that are stressors that are really tough to deal with, and it is about building up your resilience so that you can respond in a much healthier and effective way when these things happen, because things will always happen. We can't pretend that the world is a lovely place and nothing ever goes wrong. We certainly can't at the moment. But what we can do is look at, okay, well, what can I do? And it's doing what you can in the best possible way and looking for the positivity around that as well.
Really nice. And it's so important and so directly related to stress, because on the other hand, by really focusing on what we can control, on being proactive, on changing our mindset, on managing our emotions, all of these greatly contribute to diminish our stress response, to manage these triggers and stresses. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. For all of you that have questions, please don't hesitate to write something. We've touched on a lot of different topics right now in terms of stress, different types of personality, type A, type B, multitasking, managing your focus, time management, scheduling, positive psychology, stresses, managing your emotions. So if there's anything while we were talking that you felt a bit, yes, you had questions about, or you had doubts, or you weren't sure how to apply it, please let us know. Also, I'll put right now in the chat the form that you can fill in, and if you do so, we will send you the replay, and we will send you the PDF that Nicky was talking about with the different factors and exercises that can help you. So if you just put in your email address in this form, copy the link, because as soon as we close the Zoom, the link will disappear. And that's just happens every time. And then, yeah, if you just put in your email address, we will forward you the PDF with the different exercises. Nicky, is there anything you feel that we haven't covered yet that you want to cover briefly, while people maybe think of different questions they can put in the chat box?
Yeah, I think to kind of summarise or kind of reflect on what we've been talking about. So stress is a response to a stressor, and that stressor is an event that you may or may not have any control over. So the approaches are around lowering your baseline to stress so that you're living I wouldn't say a stress-free life, because I don't think that really exists for anybody, but bringing those stress levels down so that you're starting from a really strong foundation. Not ignoring the stresses in your life, so that you're looking at what can be done, and taking that approach, and understanding that you can change and learn. But that's why I think I'm probably still studying stress, is because having recognized that I am that type A, I'm still learning, and there's new research coming out all the time. So it takes time to change your habits and learn different strategies. And if your baseline has crept up, maybe you've got the classic examples used to be that as I do know somebody did, got married, moved house and had a baby, all within about 3 weeks, just before Christmas.
Wow.
So these things do happen. I can see Claire has to nip off now. Thank you, Claire. I know you had a 1 o'clock appointment, so really appreciate that you were able to join us.
Thanks for being here, Claire.
So we'll definitely catch up. So yeah, it used to be that you had all these life events happening that pushed your baseline up, and then you hear that phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yes.
that's when it starts to happen, that you've loaded up your baseline, and then there'll be something tiny like you can't find your car keys, and you start stamping around, and that's because you've just nudged the dial a bit too far and you need to bring it back down. So hopefully the activities in that PDF will help everybody to manage their baselines and just understand a bit more about what's going on for them, to manage their stress better and build up that resilience going forward.
Absolutely. I love what you said about the straw breaking the camel's back. The fact that if we don't realize, we'll just add, and then one day it'll bust. So the best thing that we can probably do for ourselves, and probably you can do for yourself, is to really notice as we're going along, how are you feeling emotionally? How are you managing it? What are your triggers? What are your stresses? Taking time out, taking breaks, and really learning to better know ourselves and create new habits that help us both from a work perspective, but also a personal perspective, to manage our emotions, our responses to the different triggers and stresses once more, I think is absolutely essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't see any other questions or comments, but what I would say, oh, we have one. But just to say, you can throw them at us afterwards. You know where to find us on LinkedIn now.
Yes.
So we've got one from James there. He heard a manager once say there's two types of people: one who absorbs stress from others and those who communicate it. Any advice to avoid absorbing other people's stress or communicating our own to others? Do you want me to pick this one up, Katie, or do you want to?
To avoid absorbing other people's stress. I think it's also very related to what you're saying, Nikki, in terms of building resilience, because I feel that once your resilience is quite high and you develop this sort of calmer approach, you don't absorb it as much. And also, again, it's a lot about perspective. And then in terms of communicating it to others, I feel this has a lot to do with how you manage it in the first place. So, for example, Nikki, when you were saying the example earlier with the email, maybe when you used to have you used to want to sort of go out and maybe tell your husband about it and get really annoyed. But then after a while, because you learn to manage it, you no longer feel the need. I know this happened to me a lot because my primary way of dealing with stress was to talk. So anyone who's there, listen to all my problems. But then after a while, because you learn to manage your stress, I feel you don't need to communicate it as much. Is there anything, Nikki, you'd like to add in terms of absorbing people's stress and communicating it to others?
Yeah, so I think in terms of there being two types of people, I think the same person can be absorbing it and communicating it. So I'm not sure that we're talking about two types of people there.
That's true.
In terms of absorbing stress, I think it is that noticing. I think a lot of this is about noticing what's going on for you. We are human beings. That's another bit of our wiring, is to notice other people's emotional states, because that can be really helpful. Because if the person next to you is absolutely terrified, that could be because they've already seen the tiger that's coming, and therefore it's helpful that you are noticing that and in that way kind of absorbing that fear, so that your stress response is already getting ready to run away from the tiger. So it's kind of understandable that we absorb other people's stress, but also noticing that, and that actually that's not going to be helpful for you. So there's a lot around mindfulness and focusing on your own thing, perhaps helping them to manage their stress. I have worked with a lot of high stress people, and the way that I deal with it is kind of acknowledging that, okay, they are stressed, and then dealing with the situation. So for some people it was, I think you need to come downstairs and have a cup of tea with me in the kitchen, take them away from their workplace, get them to deal with it, and then you can go and do something calmly so you're not absorbing it. It depends on what the event is, but if there's something you can do that can help them, but without absorbing that. And in terms of communicating, I do get very excited and talk very quickly. But if you don't want to communicate your stress to others, it's managing your own stress response. It's having the ability in yourself, so the confidence you have to say, you know what, I'm quite stressed. Can I just take 5 minutes and come back? So you can take that time out just to lower your stress levels. If you can do that, certainly taking a deep breath, few breaths in and out, even if you can't do meditation, that all helps as well. And I think the fact that you're thinking about do you communicate your stress to others will help you to manage it in yourself as well. And sometimes other people do need to notice that you're stressed. There are certain situations where you don't want to be bottling it up, so the other person will actually notice and then help you. So don't always feel you have to bottle it, but if you're in a professional situation, then actually removing yourself, calming yourself down, and then going back in can be really helpful.
Absolutely. I think that the bottling up part is important, and especially given what you said earlier with type A's that sometimes just bottle up their stress, that's also not particularly helpful. And in terms of the absorbing of people's stress, I think it's always a fine balance, because it's important to have empathy always and to care about other people. So it's unavoidable really that some of it will affect, but then it's how you manage it so that it doesn't fully affect you. And this is something I think both Nikki and I probably deal with quite regularly in terms of coaching, because obviously when you have clients coming in, they have their energy, and it can be, you know, happy, or it can be stressed, or it can be anything, but you can't absorb all of this energy, because then you might have another client, and then it's not fair on the following one to give off, you know, a stressed energy because you just received stress. So I think learning to manage your own emotions, having empathy for the people you're dealing with, yet not letting it affect you too deeply, by having again a bit of perspective and managing, you know, your breathing and taking a bit of time out also is really useful.
And if you can't leave the room, to depersonalize it. So if the person's come in with their stress, actually thinking to yourself, just going through, oh, I know they're stressed because they don't normally talk that quickly, their jacket isn't quite sitting right, they've obviously thrown it on in a hurry, and actually kind of noticing the details, it depersonalizes it, and that can help give you that distance between you and them and their emotions. So that can be a helpful technique. If you aren't in it, as I've been, you can't just leave the room, you have to stay there. That can be a helpful thing to do as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Nikki, for being with us here today. I feel we've covered a lot of different topics. So please fill in the form. We'll send you the replay, and so you can go through all of this in your own time again. And we'll send you also the PDF. And then if you have any questions, feel free to contact Nicky at Nicky Peachment in LinkedIn, or me, Katie Francis Stoddart, on LinkedIn. And yes, we look forward to seeing you again, maybe for our next webinar. And it's been great. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.